I'm Caroline Mercer, 35 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the shadow behind my brother's spotlight. Tonight, I'm sitting alone at a corner table during Governor Whitman's annual charity gala, trying to look comfortable in a dress I borrowed from a friend. Across the ballroom, my brother Nathan is shaking hands, laughing, moving from one conversation to the next, like he owns the room. Nobody notices me, not until the governor himself stops mid-step, does a double take, and says quietly, "Wait. You're Senator Mercer." Nathan sees it too. His smile falters, and in that moment, something in the room shifts. It's the moment my last name stops being a liability and starts meaning something else entirely. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been told you weren't enough, even by the people who were supposed to believe in you most. I grew up in a part of Connecticut where the family name meant everything. The Mercers weren't just well known, we were expected to be exceptional. Our name was on plaques at hospitals and libraries. My parents, Charles and Margaret Mercer, ran in circles where appearances came first and reputation was currency. They believed in achievement tradition and staying inside the lines. As kids, Nathan and I were raised to follow a path they had already mapped out: Ivy League degrees, respectable careers, the right kind of spouse, the right kind of life. Nathan fit the mold with ease. He was good-looking, charming, smart, the type who never had to try too hard. When he made captain of the tennis team, my mother threw a garden party. When he got early admission to Princeton, my father opened a bottle of vintage scotch and gave a toast like we were royalty. I didn't rebel, not really, but I asked too many questions. I wanted to know why things had to be a certain way. While Nathan played golf with future investment bankers, I was in the school library reading Supreme Court decisions. I didn't dress like the other girls in our circle, and I didn't flatter the right people. That made me a liability. At home, I heard phrases like, "just a phase," or "she's still finding herself," always with a polite smile, always with that edge. It got worse sophomore year of high school. We had an assignment to write about a real-world policy. Most of the class picked safe topics: recycling programs, traffic laws. I wrote about a controversial zoning decision that favored developers linked to major donors in our town, including one of my father's longtime clients. I got an A, but my parents got a call that same night from another couple at a charity event. My father sat me down in his study, dark wood leather chairs, framed degrees lining the wall, and asked me if I had any idea how my paper made them look. The Bradfords were there, Caroline. Their foundation is in talks with us, and now they think you're some kind of activist. I told him the research was sound, the numbers real. He said, "There's a difference between being right and being appropriate. You need to learn that." By the time Nathan was choosing dorm room curtains, I was looking at public universities with strong political science departments. I had the grades for Columbia, maybe even Yale. But I didn't want that life, not the legacy, not the name-dropping, not the pressure. I picked the University of Vermont, a place where I could breathe, think, and be seen as more than just my last name. The night I told my parents, my mother put down her fork and asked if I was joking. My father didn't say a word. He just stood up and left the room. At Christmas, relatives whispered, "Maybe she'll transfer." Someone even asked if I'd been rejected and was too embarrassed to say. Nathan stayed quiet. I think he meant well, but he was already too deep in their world to stand next to me and mine. I packed my things with no fanfare, no going-away dinner, just my grandmother's quiet hug and a note she slipped into my coat pocket. "Be brave enough to be different. Someone has to." I didn't know it yet, but those words would carry me through the years ahead, and the next time I saw my family name in print, it wouldn't be because of Nathan. I moved into my freshman dorm a week before classes started. My roommate, a theater major from Albany, brought string lights and a record player. I brought a used mini fridge and a binder full of campaign flyers I'd picked up over the summer. The campus was quiet that first weekend. Just a few early arrivals, mostly out-of-state students like me, but it already felt different. No one cared who my parents were. No one asked about legacy admissions or summer internships. I walked across campus one morning with a coffee in one hand and a local paper in the other. A small article about a city council proposal caught my eye. I didn't know it then, but that moment standing under a line of maples just starting to turn was the start of something new, something I hadn't been allowed to picture for myself. Professor Dana Mitchell taught my first political theory class. Former legislative director, sharp as glass, not one for small talk. She challenged my analysis in class, pointed out every gap in my logic, and then asked me to stay after one afternoon. "You have good instincts," she said, handing back my paper, "but you don't trust your voice yet. Work on that." No one in my family had ever said my voice mattered. They had opinions about my posture, my tone, how I presented myself, but not about my thoughts. That simple comment, "Trust your voice," stayed with me through every course, every late-night study session, every cold walk back from the library. While Nathan posted photos from corporate mixers and charity galas, I spent my evenings organizing. I joined a campus advocacy group focused on education access. We gathered data, wrote proposals, met with administrators. By the end of that year, we'd helped secure expanded scholarship funding for students from low-income neighborhoods. It wasn't headline news, but it mattered. I went home for Thanksgiving that year knowing what to expect. My father carved the turkey while my mother refilled wine glasses, and Nathan dominated the table with stories about his internship in New York. When my aunt turned to me and asked, "Are you still doing that political club thing?" I barely got a word out before my father stepped in. "Caroline's still figuring things out," he said, waving it away. "Hopefully she'll find something serious before graduation." I set my fork down slowly. "I actually accepted a summer position with Senator Lowell's campaign team," I said, in his Boston office. The table went quiet. My mother raised an eyebrow. "Will it pay well?" "It's about the experience," I said. My father didn't miss a beat. "Experience doesn't pay rent. My scholarship covers most of my tuition." He shook his head. "Scholarships that could have gone to someone who actually needed them if you'd just taken your spot at Columbia." Nathan cleared his throat and changed the subject. I didn't say anything else. I just looked down at my plate and listened as my own family talked around me. By junior year, I was working part-time in the office of a city councilwoman. It wasn't glamorous. I helped with constituent calls and sorted voter outreach lists. But it was real work, policy work. I was learning how things moved behind the scenes. I still went home for holidays, but it got harder each time. My parents asked fewer questions. Nathan rarely mentioned my name in front of guests. At my cousin's wedding, I heard my mother explain to someone that I was still in her nonprofit phase. I stood 5 feet away, holding a cup of coffee like I wasn't even there. Thanksgiving came again. Nathan had just gotten a promotion and a hefty bonus. My parents opened a vintage bottle of champagne to celebrate. I shared that my team had helped increase voter turnout among young people by 12% in a recent municipal election. My father took a sip and looked at me like I was a child. "And how does that help your career, Caroline? Is this something you plan to do long term?" "It already is my career." He set down his glass. "You're 30 years old. Living in what I can only imagine is a modest apartment, making what, $40,000 a year. That's not success. That's not sustainable." My mother said nothing. She just glanced toward the kitchen like she wished she could disappear into it. I stood up, reached for my coat. "Success isn't only about money, Dad." "In the real world, he said it is." I drove home in silence that night. My apartment was cold. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall, wondering if I'd made a mistake. If I'd built my life around ideals that didn't mean anything to anyone but me. 2 weeks later, I helped run a community forum in a neighborhood outside Burlington. Afterward, a woman with 2 young kids approached me. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "Before your team came to our door, I'd never voted, never thought it mattered. But this year, I filled out my ballot with my daughter sitting next to me. She saw me take that seriously. That's because of you." I wrote her words down on a sticky note and taped it to my fridge. That note stayed there through every late rent check and every ignored family text. Not long after that, I met Logan Mitchell at a policy event. Tall, thoughtful, with a quiet way of listening that made you feel like you were the only one in the room. When he found out I was Caroline Mercer, he said, "My mother talks about you like you're going to be president someday." We had our first date in a diner just off campus, talked for 5 hours straight. By the time the server cleared our plates, we were already making plans to meet again. With Logan's encouragement and a quiet confidence that had been building for years, I made a decision I hadn't told anyone in my family. I was going to run for city council. No family money, no high-powered donors, just a clipboard, a borrowed office space, and a group of volunteers who believed in what I was trying to do. I filed the paperwork on a rainy Tuesday morning. A week later, I called home. "I'm running for office," I told them, "for what my mother asked, city council." There was a pause. "Caroline, be serious," she said. "I am serious." "This is embarrassing," my father said. "You'll lose. You'll waste what little money you have. And then what, I've got a campaign manager, a treasurer, and a field team. We've built out our platform and our outreach plan." Nathan chimed in, then cautious. "Politics isn't what you think it is, Caroline. It's not just good intentions." "I'm aware," I said. "But good intentions are more than we've had in office for a while. They didn't say goodbye, just hung up." My campaign wasn't polished. It wasn't expensive. But it was personal. I knocked on doors. I listened. I showed up. The night of the election, Logan and I waited in a small restaurant with 10 volunteers and a coffee machine that never worked right. When the results came in and I saw my name listed as the winner, even by a narrow margin, I just sat there for a second stunned. My phone stayed quiet. No calls, no texts from home. The next morning, I got a message from Nathan. "Congrats on the council seat. Small pond, but I guess it's a start." That was it. No mention of the votes, the organizing, the people we'd reached. Just another reminder that I was still the outlier in their world. But I had work to do, the real kind, and the next chapter. It was already waiting. My first months on the city council felt like being dropped into the deep end of the pool. No float, no warning. The learning curve was steep, but I stayed late, asked questions, took notes. I found out quickly that the work wasn't flashy. It was budget zoning meetings, backlogged community requests. But I liked the details. I liked how the pieces fit together, how a carefully written ordinance could ripple out and actually improve someone's day-to-day life. I focused my first term on things I knew mattered: affordable housing, better transit access, making city data public so people could actually understand how decisions were being made. That kind of transparency didn't earn headlines, but it got noticed. Local newspapers began to include my name more often. People in my district started recognizing me when I walked into town halls or neighborhood meetings. It wasn't long before a small piece ran in the Hartford Courant, a profile about a new kind of public servant who showed up early and returned every constituent call. My family was mentioned briefly, just a footnote. That part mattered less than the rest. What mattered was that I'd earned the coverage not because of my last name, but in spite of it. Meanwhile, Nathan's face was turning up in statewide political articles. He had become chief of staff to Governor Whitman, always near the center of the photo, always composed. At family gatherings, the few I still attended, the conversations looped around Nathan's world. Policy meetings with the governor, Bill, signings, big fundraisers. During one summer dinner, my mother started a sentence with, "Nathan was telling the governor just yesterday," and I just sat there sipping my water. It was like I didn't exist. When someone asked about my council work, the subject changed before I could answer. I started noticing it everywhere, small moments that added up. My mother telling a friend I was still in the nonprofit space. My father reminding someone at a wedding that Caroline chose a different track, a quieter life. They never mentioned the campaign I'd won, the legislation I'd helped pass, the people who called my office daily because they knew I would listen. Even when I was re-elected with a larger margin, the silence from home stayed steady. No messages, no visits, just a nod from Nathan during Christmas dinner like he was acknowledging a neighbor, not a sister. The decision to run for state senate wasn't something I rushed. A seat opened unexpectedly when the sitting senator stepped down due to illness. At first, I assumed more seasoned names would jump in, but instead, I got phone calls, community leaders, education advocates, people I'd worked alongside who thought I should consider it. Logan and I talked about it over several nights. It would be harder, more expensive, more public, more political in every way. But the policy areas aligned with what I cared most about: education, healthcare, transparent governance. I filed the paperwork a week later. I made one last call before the announcement to my parents. My mother answered. I could hear the click of dishes in the background. I wanted to let you both know directly, I said. I'm announcing a run for state senate tomorrow. There was silence for a few seconds. Caroline, she said, don't you think this has gone far enough? It's not a phase, I said. It's my career. What matters, she said, is that you keep alienating yourself from this family. Nathan's been working respectfully with the governor. Meanwhile, you're still out there doing whatever this is. I'm not asking for approval, I said, just letting you know. Her tone shifted. If you go through with this, don't expect support, financial or otherwise. I've been on my own for a while now. She didn't argue, just said, we really thought you'd outgrow this. Then she hung up. The campaign was hard. We were underfunded. My opponents had decades of donor lists and access to television coverage. Some of them whispered that even my own family didn't back me, that if the Mercers didn't believe in me, why should anyone else? Logan kept me focused. He was the calm center when things felt overwhelming. After a long day of walking neighborhoods in the rain, he made tea and didn't try to fix anything. Just sat next to me while I stared at spreadsheets and questioned if this was worth it. Then one evening, after another exhausting public forum, he came home with a small box. I know this campaign isn't over yet, he said, but I don't want to wait for the perfect time. There won't be one. And I want to do this life with you, whatever shape it takes. It wasn't a grand moment. No music, no audience, just the two of us in our apartment, tired and hopeful. I said yes. Election night came cold and tense. The numbers were tight. We watched from a borrowed conference room with a handful of friends and campaign staff, most of whom had been with me since my city council days. Just after midnight, the results came in. I had won, by fewer than 1,000 votes, but enough. No calls came from my parents, not even a message. The next day, my phone buzzed with a message from Nathan. Congrats. Senate's a big step. Hope it works out. That was it. Still, I walked into the State House that January with my head up and my name on the door, Senator Caroline Mercer. The same name that used to make me feel like I didn't belong anywhere now sat on every official letterhead and committee notice. I spent the first year working the same way I always had, quietly, seriously. I took on education policy, healthcare expansion, and government transparency. I wrote legislation carefully, showed up early, stayed late. One newspaper ran a piece calling me the policy wonk with a backbone. Not the flashiest title, but it stuck. Colleagues from both parties started coming to me for help drafting their bills. I didn't make speeches for the cameras. I just did the work. And slowly, my name, the one my parents had worked so hard to reshape, started to mean something else. Not just Mercer, Senator Mercer. And the next invitation I received would change everything. The envelope was heavy cream stock, no return address, just my name in formal script. Inside a single card, Governor Whitman requests the honor of your presence at the annual Children's Education Gala. It wasn't signed, but I knew who handled the guest list. Nathan. As chief of staff, those details would have gone through him. Maybe it was a formality. Maybe someone added my name without realizing. But I held the card for a long time before setting it down beside the sink. Logan found me there that evening, still staring at it. "You going?" he asked, setting his briefcase on the floor. "I'm not sure," I said. "It feels like walking into a room where no one expects to see me or wants to." He looked at the card, then back at me. "You're a United States Senator, Caroline. You've earned your place there, whether they admit it or not." It took a few days. I said no out loud 3 separate times before finally saying yes. I didn't want to go as the sister or the daughter. I went as the senator. The night of the event, I wore a simple black dress with long sleeves and a quiet neckline. Logan, in a dark suit and striped tie, took my hand as we stepped out of the car. The venue was one of those historic hotels with chandeliers taller than most apartment ceilings and staff who knew every guest's drink order before they reached the bar. From the entrance, I saw Nathan right away near the front close to the governor laughing with someone from the state board. He hadn't seen me yet. We were led to a table near the back. Not a snub, but not exactly a spotlight either. Dinner service was quiet. Our table mates were polite, a judge I'd worked with in the Senate, a university dean, a couple from one of the hospital foundations. If anyone noticed Nathan and I weren't seated together, they didn't mention it. Between the main course and dessert, I excused myself. On the way back, passing rows of tables, I caught pieces of conversation that I wasn't meant to hear. "That's the Mercer girl, isn't it? Still hasn't quite found her place. Shame with a name like that." I didn't stop. Just returned to my seat, folded my napkin, and waited for the speeches to begin. Governor Whitman stepped to the podium. He spoke about education funding the Foundation's outreach programs, a recent grant to expand early childhood learning in underserved districts. I half listened. I was still thinking about those voices behind me, still wondering if showing up had been a mistake. Then halfway through his closing, he stepped away from the microphone and began moving table to table, shaking hands. Our corner of the room quieted before I realized why. He was heading straight for us. I stood as he reached our table. His eyes paused on me. There was a flicker of surprise, then recognition. "Wait, you're Senator Mercer." He said it low but clearly. Behind him, I saw Nathan look up. He froze. I reached out calm and steady. "Yes, Governor. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation." He took my hand. "Your work on the Federal Education Committee has been impressive. I followed that proposal on rural school funding closely." I nodded. "We're refining the framework with bipartisan input. I'd be glad to speak more about it." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Nathan approach a notepad still in hand, his face pale. "Ryan, the governor said," turning slightly, "why didn't you mention that Senator Mercer would be here tonight? We could have arranged a more proper welcome." There was a pause, just long enough for the weight of it to settle. Nathan looked at me, then back to the governor. "Senator Mercer is my sister, sir." The words landed heavy. The people seated near us had stopped pretending to eat. Even the quartet had gone quieter. "Your sister," the governor asked, visibly surprised. "I wasn't aware you had family in the Senate." Nathan's smile flickered. "Family can be complicated." "Indeed," I said, stepping in gently. "But we all serve the public in our own ways." Governor Whitman, ever the professional, took the shift in stride. "Well, this is a welcome surprise. I'd be honored to host both of you at the mansion sometime. A family of public servants, rather rare these days." He moved on to the next table. The air around us didn't. Nathan stood in place. Caroline, he started voice low. I didn't know you were attending. As a senator from this state, I said it would have been unusual to leave me off the list. He exhaled. That's not what I meant. We should talk. Not here, but soon. Should we? I asked. After years of silence. After our parents have rewritten my entire career into something they can explain away at fundraisers. He looked down at his hands. This isn't the place, he said again, but yes, we should talk. Before I could answer, Logan leaned toward me. Caroline, the governor's wife, is asking to speak with you. I looked up. Across the room, she was gesturing. I have people to meet, I said to Nathan, smoothing my dress as I rose. Let me know when you're ready for an honest conversation. As I walked across that ballroom, I felt something settle. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just stood in my place not as the Mercer disappointment, but as Senator Caroline Mercer, a woman whose record could no longer be ignored. The rest of the evening moved quickly. People who'd barely nodded earlier now reached out to shake my hand. Policy staffers offered to connect. A superintendent asked if I had time for a school tour during recess. I kept my tone even, polite, professional. We left just before 10. As Logan opened the car door, Governor Whitman approached one last time, this time without staff, without fanfare. Senator, he said, I owe you a more formal welcome. Had I known your relation to my chief of staff, I would have introduced you properly from the podium. There's no need, I said. Family can be complicated. He hesitated. I've heard things over the years, but having watched your work and your presence tonight, I may need to reconsider what I thought I knew. I didn't answer right away, just gave a small nod. As we pulled away from the hotel, Logan took my hand. You handled that with grace, he said. I've had years of practice, I replied, but this felt different, like something finally shifted. He looked at me. No, the truth didn't change tonight. It just became visible. Outside, the lights of the city moved past the window, and somewhere between that hotel and our quiet apartment, I knew what came next would matter even more. 3 mornings after the gala, my office line rang with a number I hadn't seen in years. It was my father's private line. Carolyn, he said without preamble, we've been talking. Your mother and I. We think it might be time to have dinner. Clear the air. There was no mention of the gala, no acknowledgement of what had unfolded in front of 200 guests. Just recent developments and perhaps its time. His voice was calm, but I knew its edges. He wasn't offering an apology. He was adjusting to new facts. I appreciate the invitation, I said, keeping my tone steady. But I think before we share a meal, we should talk. Honestly, about the past few years. The past is the past, he said. Dwelling on it won't help anything. I disagree. There was silence. You've rewritten the story of my life to people who never met me, I continued. You've told them I failed when I've been building something the entire time. That needs to be acknowledged before anything else. There was another pause, longer this time. Perhaps we've had different perspectives, he said. It's not about perspectives. It's about respect. The line was quiet again. Then, after a long breath, he softened just slightly. Your position in the Senate, it's impressive. Maybe we can start from there. I didn't answer right away. I'll need time, I said. And if we do meet Logan, we'll be with me. He's part of my life. As you wish. We hung up. I sat still for a while, looking out the window of my office. Cars moved past below. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. I couldn't quite tell how I felt. Later that night, Logan and I sat on the couch with 2 mugs of tea and no TV. You don't have to rush into anything, he said. You're allowed to take space. Set the terms. I nodded. I don't know what I want from them anymore. You can want a little, or nothing, or more later. It's yours to define now. 2 weeks later, we met them at a quiet restaurant near the shoreline. Private dining room, low lights, a small table set for 4. My mother greeted me with a quick, careful hug. My father shook Logan's hand like he was interviewing him. The meal was awkward, polite small talk. Committee assignments, Logan's consulting work, renovations to their house. They asked questions, but they were controlled. Tidy, safe. About halfway through, my mother set her fork down and folded her hands. "We may not have always understood your choices," she said, "but we never stopped caring." "Caring isn't the same as respecting," I said gently. "You didn't just misunderstand. You told people I had failed. While I was working passing legislation representing people who trusted me, you acted like I didn't exist." My father looked down at his plate. Perhaps, he said slowly, we were hasty in our judgments. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. "I need honesty moving forward," I said. "I need respect for my work, my marriage, my choices. I won't keep pretending none of it happened." They nodded. We finished the meal quietly. As we stood to leave, my mother gave me another brief hug. "We are proud of you, Caroline," she whispered. "In our way." Logan and I walked out into the night air without saying much. We didn't have to. Nathan reached out a few days later, asked to meet at a coffee shop near my district office. He arrived early, already seated nursing a plain black coffee. He looked tired, less polished than usual, a little more real. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not just for the gala, for everything." I sat down across from him. "I let them tell a story about you that wasn't true," he said. "I didn't correct them. I didn't speak up. Because as long as you were the outlier, I didn't have to examine my own path. I got to be the success story. No questions asked. I didn't interrupt. I'm successful," he said, "by their standards. But watching you stand there that night after everything, I couldn't stop thinking. Maybe I chose the easier road, not the better one." We sat in silence for a while, the hum of the espresso machine filling the quiet. Our conversation didn't fix everything, but it opened a door. We started texting more often, short check-ins, occasional phone calls. He came to a town hall once and sat in the back, no fanfare, just there. But the person I didn't expect to hear from was my grandmother. Grace called me from her assisted living facility and asked if I'd visit. I brought her favorite lemon pastries and met her in the common room near the fireplace. She reached for my hand right away. "I saw the news," she said. "I watched it all. I figured you might." I said, "You always find a way. I've been following your work for years," she said. "I kept articles, watched hearings. I just never had the courage to tell your parents how proud I was. I should have. That's my regret. You were the only one who said anything at the start," I told her. "That note you gave me, I still have it." She smiled. "Your grandfather," she said, "was more like you than he ever let on. He wanted to change things. Your father buried that part of himself to please his own father. And when he saw it in you loud and unashamed, I think it scared him." She looked at me then, soft but steady. "You reminded him of what he gave up. It reframed everything." Later that month, I sponsored a bill to expand mental health resources for families navigating generational estrangement. I'd seen firsthand how easy it was for people to be isolated and how hard it was to come back. Logan and I started talking more seriously about having kids. One night, sitting on the porch with a blanket and 2 glasses of cider, I said, "I know exactly what I don't want." He waited. "I don't want our child to feel like love depends on what path they choose. I want them to feel seen all the way." He nodded. "We'll mess up, I'm sure, but we'll get that part right." As fall turned to winter, small things shifted. My parents sent an invitation for Christmas dinner. Nathan offered to help review a draft of one of my bills. At my 40th birthday, they hosted a small dinner at their home, first one in over a decade. At dessert, my father stood glass in hand. To Caroline, he said, "Who had the courage to define success on her own terms? You've made a difference in ways we didn't see coming. It wasn't perfect, but it was real." Looking around that table, Logan's hand in mine, Nathan beside me, my parents awkward, but trying, I understood something. Maybe healing didn't always look like reconciliation. Maybe it looked like effort. And the road ahead, it still had room to grow. Spring in D.C. came early that year. The cherry blossoms around the tidal basin bloomed the last week of March, and every sidewalk cafe had its tables pulled out by the 1st of April. Logan and I had settled into a rhythm, weekdays divided between hearings and district calls, weekends flying home when we could, or just spending a quiet morning reading side by side on our porch. 6 months into my first Senate term, I was on the Education and Healthcare committees, right where I'd hoped to be. I'd made it a point to keep my focus tight, detailed policy, meaningful outcomes, no wasted noise. I wasn't on cable news. I wasn't chasing sound bites. The work happened in committee rooms, in late-night drafting sessions and quiet offices where real laws were written. That low profile had an unexpected upside. Most people outside of my home state didn't recognize me on the street. I could still walk to the corner bakery without getting stopped, still shop for groceries without a camera nearby. It gave me a kind of freedom, even in the middle of all that structure. Then one Tuesday morning, my assistant Haley walked into my office with an envelope. "This came through the front desk," she said, setting it down carefully. It was thick cardstock, pale ivory with raised lettering. "Governor Whitman requests the honor of your presence at the annual Governor's Gala in support of the Children's Education Foundation." There was no note, just the invitation identical to the one I'd received the year before, except this time it came with certainty. After what had happened at the last gala, this wasn't a clerical inclusion. Nathan had to know I was on the list. That night, Logan set down his laptop and looked across the living room. "You going?" I nodded slowly. "It's time." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Let's get your dress out early this time." I chose the same black gown I'd worn the year before. Not because I had to, but because it fit. Simple, elegant, familiar. The only thing different was the pin I added a small silver seal on my left shoulder, U.S. Senate. We arrived just after 7. The ballroom was already buzzing. The tables were arranged the same as last year, but this time our place cards were at the front, just 2 rows from the governor's head table. Nathan was already working the room, but he saw us the moment we walked in. He made his way over slowly. Not rushed, not avoiding. "Caroline," he said, "you look well." "You too," I said. There was a beat of quiet. Then he said, "Thanks for agreeing to meet tomorrow." I nodded, looking forward to it. He gave a small smile and turned to greet someone else easing back into the crowd. The rest of the evening unfolded with the kind of measured elegance these events always had, the speeches, the meal, the donations pledged between courses. But something had shifted. During dessert, Governor Whitman stood to speak. He acknowledged the usual supporters, thanked the foundation board, and then turned slightly toward our table. "I also want to recognize someone here tonight whose work in federal education policy has shaped more than one initiative we're now adopting, statewide Senator Caroline Mercer. We're honored to have you with us." A soft applause followed. Logan squeezed my hand under the table. This time, no one whispered behind me. No one looked surprised. After the gala, I didn't go home. I flew to Hartford that night, then drove to my district office in the morning. Nathan was already waiting when I arrived. We walked to a coffee shop nearby, the same one we'd met at months earlier, the same table by the window. He ordered tea. I got coffee. I meant what I said he told me once we sat. I've been thinking a lot about what comes next for me, and about what it looks like to make choices that aren't just about following expectations. I didn't interrupt. I've spent so long trying to stay inside the lines, I don't know what I want anymore, he said. But I know I want to be better at showing up, especially for you. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be, just a brother trying to rebuild something not for our parents, not for show, but for us. The next few months passed quietly. I kept my head down in the Senate, continued pushing on education reform, expanded access to mental health services, especially for families navigating estrangement and long-term care challenges. I met with community colleges, hosted roundtables, wrote late into the night. And then something shifted. An editor from a national publication reached out. They were doing a profile on new senators making quiet impact. They'd heard about my work. I sat for the interview, reluctantly answered their questions plainly, and forgot about it the moment I left the room. But when the piece came out, it landed hard. Not flashy, just honest, focused on the years of work, city council, state, Senate, community organizing. It talked about family expectations and quiet persistence, about staying when it would have been easier to walk away. That's when the phone calls started. Campaign offices, political organizations, people asking about the next race, about future plans, about higher office. I didn't answer right away. Instead, Logan and I drove to the coast for a weekend. We stayed in a little inn by the water, nothing fancy. We walked the shoreline in the early morning and talked about everything except politics. Then one afternoon, as we sat by the window watching the tide come in, Logan said quietly, "If you do decide to take the next step, just remember you don't owe anyone a version of yourself that doesn't feel true." I looked at him. I know. And I meant it. Because for the first time, the next step wasn't about proving something. It was about what I wanted to build. And just beyond that quiet, salt-swept weekend, a bigger decision was waiting. The article made its way through state circles faster than I expected. By Monday morning, I was getting calls from offices I hadn't worked with in years, former colleagues, local organizers, even one or two who'd once called my campaign a phase. They'd all read it. The piece wasn't dramatic. It was just honest, a full account of the work I'd done, the obstacles I'd faced, and how I'd kept going anyway. That week, my office was busier than usual. Haley had to rearrange our calendar twice to fit in new policy meetings. There was a sudden uptick in invitations, panels, forums, leadership roundtables. Most I declined. I wasn't interested in spotlight events. But I did agree to meet with a few education groups that had reached out, especially the ones trying to replicate our community model in other states. One morning after back-to-back budget hearings, I came back to my desk and found a sealed envelope. It wasn't marked, just folded neatly and placed to the side of my inbox. Inside was a short note from Governor Whitman. It read, "Senator Mercer, thank you again for your presence and professionalism at this year's gala. I've reviewed the committee's notes on your proposed education bill. I would welcome the chance to speak further if you're open to it. I scheduled the meeting for the following Tuesday. The conversation went longer than either of us planned. What began as a brief policy discussion turned into a broader dialogue about long-term infrastructure for rural districts, teacher retention, and state-federal partnerships. Before I left, he said, "You've built something durable, Caroline. It's rare, and it's needed." That same week, I returned to Connecticut for a district visit. Town halls, classroom drop-ins, a ribbon cutting for a new family health center we'd helped fund. At the last stop of the day, as I stepped off the stage, my father was waiting near the side exit. He looked like he had at my high school graduation suit, slightly too formal for the occasion, standing just out of frame. "Good turnout," he said, nodding toward the crowd. "It was," I said. We walked for a bit down the sidewalk. No press, no handlers, just the sound of passing cars. "I read the article," he said finally. I didn't reply. "You've made quite a name for yourself, and I think we may have misunderstood what that meant for too long." We paused at the edge of a crosswalk. "Caroline," he said, looking over, You've built something we can't ignore, and I was wrong to dismiss it. It wasn't everything, but it was more than he'd ever said before. Later that month, Nathan invited us to dinner, just the four of us. His wife Allison made roasted chicken and mashed sweet potatoes. We sat around their kitchen table and talked about things we hadn't touched in years. Not politics exactly, but family, regret, possibility. Near the end of the evening, Nathan cleared his throat. "There's something else," he said. "The governor asked me if I'd consider running. Not for anything yet, just think about it." Logan set his fork down. I waited. "I haven't said yes," Nathan added quickly. "But if I do, I want to do it differently this time. Not from behind a desk, not as someone's second, and not without being honest about the way we've treated you." I didn't answer right away, but I nodded. Before we left that night, Allison walked me to the door. She gave me a quiet smile. "He's learning," she said. "You taught him more than you realize." The next morning, my inbox was full again. A national advocacy group had shared my bill summary. A mid-sized outlet ran a follow-up piece on women leaders shifting long-held narratives. And somewhere in the middle of it all, my mother sent me a message. No subject line. Just a photo, a clipping from a newspaper showing my name beside a headline about education reform. Underneath it, she wrote, "We're proud of you." It wasn't signed, but I knew. As the days passed, I kept working. The bills kept moving. But something internal had shifted, not in the headlines or the meetings, but in the way I stood at the podium, in how I answered questions. I wasn't just defending a record anymore, I was shaping something larger. And late one Friday night, while reviewing case files at my desk, Logan stepped into my office with 2 cups of tea. He sat across from me, leaned forward, and asked, "When's the last time you stopped and looked at what you've built?" I looked around. At the files, the reports, the framed picture of Grace and me on my swearing-in day. And then at him. "It's starting to feel like mine now," I said. We left the office with the lights still on behind us. The air was warm, early summer. There were still things to mend. Still places that ached when I thought too long about them. But for the first time, I wasn't walking uphill alone. The weight had shifted. The center had held. And as the elevator doors closed behind us, I knew what came next wouldn't be a fight for recognition. It would be a choice, a new direction. And this time, no one else would define what success had to look like. A few weeks after that night in the office, I stood at the edge of our garden watering the tomato plants that had finally taken to the soil. The air was still just the hum of a distant lawnmower and birds overhead. Logan stepped out onto the porch, coffee in one hand, and asked quietly, "You ready for the next chapter?" I nodded. I think I've been ready for a while. There was no big announcement, no press release, just a decision to keep doing the work, but to do it with a deeper kind of purpose. I wasn't chasing titles. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. The ground beneath me felt different now, steadier. My parents never fully said the words "we were wrong," but they showed up, slowly, in their own ways. My father sent a note after a Senate hearing, just a few clipped lines, but he signed it, "Love, Dad." My mother began forwarding me articles about education initiatives in other states with short messages. "Thought this might interest you." It was new ground, uneven, but real. Nathan and I kept meeting for coffee every few weeks. Sometimes we talked about policy, other times we just sat together, not as rivals, not as symbols of anything, just siblings figuring it out. That summer, Grace's health began to decline. I visited her often, sometimes just sitting beside her in silence while the light moved across the window. On one visit, she held my hand and whispered, "You did it, Caroline. You broke the pattern." I squeezed her hand gently. I had help. She smiled. That's how all change begins. One person brave enough to try, and another person willing to believe in them. When she passed, I spoke at her memorial not as a senator, but as her granddaughter. I talked about the note she'd once slipped into my coat pocket. Be brave enough to be different. Someone has to. And how that single line had followed me through every door I was told I didn't belong in. Logan and I welcomed our daughter in early spring. We named her Grace. Late at night, while feeding her by the window, I'd sometimes think about how many years I spent trying to earn approval from people who never learned how to give it freely, and how in the end, I found something even stronger, my own measure of what mattered. The truth is, being underestimated never broke me. It built me. It forced me to stand tall in rooms that weren't designed for me. It taught me to trust my own voice when no one else echoed it back. And it helped me understand that dignity isn't something anyone hands you. It's something you protect, especially when others try to dismiss it. So, if you've ever been made to feel small in your own story, I hope you remember this. You don't have to follow someone else's map to build a meaningful life. Sometimes the quiet path, the one without applause, leads you right to yourself. Thanks for listening to my story. If any part of it felt familiar, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to share your experience in the comments or pass this along to someone who might need to hear it today. And if you haven't already, you're welcome to subscribe. I'll be here sharing the quiet, true things that often go unheard.